Welcome to another edition of Hotline Live. Tonight's special guest, Sara Stapleton Barrera. And now, the man who refuses to play the Weedle, Pablo de la Rosa.
Welcome to Hotline Live for June 5th, 2020, broadcasting from the Rio Grande Valley out to the world. Shout out to some friends who sent in kudos this week from Monte Alto, Texas, Falfurrias, Elsa, Texas, and also Raymondville, which we're going to be talking about a little bit later today, coincidentally. Shout out to those people. While we wait for folks to come into the live stream, saw this really neat thread on Twitter this week of black-owned businesses in McAllen on Twitter. Really interesting, and with pictures of the businesses and what they sell, some restaurants, delicious food. On this list of black-owned businesses in the Rio Grande Valley, Southern Fried on 16th and Business 83. I think that's McAllen. And I think the one everybody's heard about and everyone has visited this week because they were bombarded with customers. They ran out of donuts at some point. Is Yummy's, located off 10th and Galveston Avenue as well. Soul Truck, located off of Trenton and 281. Fantastic food truck. Fried pork, cornbread muffins, sushi. My God. And I think we'll post this up on the Hotline blog, or I know I retweeted it out as well earlier this week. Jamaican Jerk Stop. Also another fantastic black-owned business in the Rio Grande Valley. 7 Ink Tattoo Studio in San Juan, Texas. And, of course, one we're all very familiar with because H-E-B carries our product and it's very popular, is the Jank Original Gourmet Barbecue Sauce. You can find it at any H-E-B. Food Ahmed off 10th and Martin Avenue. Owned and operated by board-certified internal medicine Dr. Cooper. All plant-based food products. McAllen's first ever ice cream shop to sell Thai-inspired ice cream rolls called Rolling with Cream. It's also an ice cream food truck. Lando Tattoos. And I think those are the ones that are on there, but RGV Dreads. And you can find that on Twitter. Let me actually retweet that right now. It should be on my Twitter profile. For those of you who are watching and want to find that, if you follow us on Twitter, it's right at the top of the profile. Now, I want to get started this week with something that happened earlier today. Everybody's heard about it. Everybody's talking about it on social media. And it is the chainsaw attacker at the Black Lives Matter protests happening in downtown McAllen earlier today. Now, as many of you might know, this man has been detained, but we do not know what the charges are yet. His name, interestingly, was not released, mentioned by either the Monitor or, according to the Monitor, by the McAllen Police Department. Usually we see a lot in the local papers, in the local news. When somebody's arrested, they go as far as even showing the headshot after they've been arrested at the police station, names, ages, town of origin, everything. But not clear yet why. His identity has not been revealed. Now, I know that there are some names going around on social media. However, I was sent multiple screenshots of different names that actually could have been him. Same last name, different first names. So I was unable to confirm that way. The monitor is always able to confirm with police, but this time they didn't. So we don't have official confirmation of who he is, and we also don't know what he might be charged with. Now, the video that I'm about to show is what happened earlier today in downtown McAllen at a Black Lives Matter protest. Trigger warnings. There's a lot of very hateful speech. There's some aggression, some physical aggression in the video. So to those who don't wish to watch that, I would hop off the live stream for now. We'll be back with our next topic at about 8:30, but I'm going to be showing these videos because I think it's very important to talk about racism and colorism in the Rio Grande Valley. A lot of people this week have been saying they don't exist, but as we will see from this video, it does exist in the valley. So again, this is the original video that played on social media. Again, trigger warning on this hate speech here on this video. Let's take a look at what happened in downtown McAllen.
Get the fuck out of here! Sorry. Sorry. Get the fuck home! Get the fuck home! That bullshit with some fucking nigger and a bad cop do not belong here. This is not up there. This is here. Get the fuck home! You fucking idiots, do this shit again. Get the fuck out of here. I don't give a shit. Where you work? Leave them alone. They're not doing anything. No, they're escalating the bullshit. Hey! Move! I'm not even with them. Get the fuck out of here!
So, as you saw from that video, a little bit different angle than what we saw on social media earlier, but I wanted to show that that video that you just saw is before the man went back to his vehicle and took out a chainsaw to then confront the crowd. In the video we just saw, we saw him handling protesters physically. We saw him destroying posters. So at a minimum, it could be something like assault and destruction of property, something like that. And that video definitely shows that part. And we'll play it again so that you can see the section where he handles one of the protesters. Let's go now to the other video that shows him after he went back to his truck and came at the crowd with a powered chainsaw, unfortunately.
Whoa! Hey! Move! Move! Go home! Go home! Go home! Go home! Go home! Go home! Don't let those fucking niggas up there fool you! Don't let those fucking trash and Antifa bullshit people fool you! Don't let these pendejos right here! Don't let these fucking assholes lie to you! Don't let them lie to you! This is a valley!
So that shows the rest of this incident. So there's actually two videos, one before the chainsaw, where he physically handles at least one of the protesters, destroys some of the posters. Now, there could have been more interaction that's not on video, but this is what we have seen. And so at some point, you can hear in the video somebody yelling, "Call 911." The cops were called, and they did show up. However, this individual was not detained. The police officers talked to him, and he was still very aggressive and I think belligerent, but the cops did not detain him. Let's take a look at that conversation that the police officers had with him after they arrived on the scene.
Mr. Payne, I will gladly go home. Just tell them to go home. Don't let them put up with this shit. Please don't put up with this shit.
They're not doing anything wrong.
Mr. Payne, I will gladly go home. Just tell them to go home.
So I guess he was able to talk to the police officers, explain maybe what he was doing there, even though he did physically attack somebody, did destroy these posters, did threaten protesters' lives with this powered saw, and also yelled racist words and threats into the crowd. He was not detained for a reason that is still unclear. I know there's been a Monitor news story out and some coverage on social media from other channels, but that question has not yet been technically addressed of why this man, who had just clearly shown intent to injure people with a saw, was actually just let go right after to perhaps either continue threatening or go through with his threats. So, a very dangerous situation, unclear why he wasn't detained. At that point, there were a lot of posts on social media of the video, a lot of sharing, a lot of outcry for this man to be detained. And so one of the images being shared online was frames from the video showing the logo on that truck that the man is shown exiting from. And Twitter got to work to find out who this individual was. And again, there were some, confirmations of the business, who it was, the name and everything. But again, I did receive a lot of direct messages with more information about who this person could be. And there was more than one that looked right, with same last name, two different first names. So I chose not to choose one of them on my own without seeing some kind of confirmation from and they both look similar, by the way. It might have been just a case of him having two different profiles. So wasn't 100% sure, didn't want to record on video the whole situation. But with this, they were able to post some of these names up on the internet and try to get to the bottom of this. But ultimately, he was detained. Now, I want to talk about the racism and the colorism that exists here in the Valley. We've spent so many days since the murder of George Floyd and the protests around the country that were a result of that here in the Valley, talking about or debating between people whether or not racism and colorism exists in the Valley, spending a lot of time on that on social media, between accounts, in public discussions. And I think that this man's actions to stop this protest actually prove the opposite of his point, which is that we do need these protests here. We do need to have these conversations here. And my question is, how might have this turned out differently if this was a different crowd? So if this man had done this at a business event, at a community event, at the convention center, at Sombrero Fest, came out here swinging with, a live saw, and threatened the crowd like that, would the police's reaction have been the same? And I think that the answer is no. I don't think so. I think that man would have been detained, and I think that he would have been dealt with much more aggressively. But it didn't happen here. And it makes you wonder if it was because he was threatening a crowd of protesters who were protesting against the police in the first place. So perhaps those cops chose to handle this in a much less aggressive way in that context. Does that show racism, colorism? Just the fact that different people are protected differently in our community, I think that it does. I think that it does in terms of how the cops reacted, in terms of how the police department took its time to then detain this man, and in terms of some of the language being shown here, and also, which I'm not going to show on the show, is some of the reactions from around the Rio Grande Valley to the video. They were not all in agreement with the protesters, and they were not all against the action of the police officers or anything like that. So, these issues are very important here. I think that this has really brought out for a lot of people how we need to talk about not just police, but all sort of law enforcement, immigration enforcement organizations on the border. And we're actually going to talk about some of that later in this episode when we talk about District 27, when we talk about Eddie Lucio Jr. building basically an immigration detention center in Raymondville, spending almost $1 trillion on that. Almost $1 billion. And so we have to have this conversation, right? And we're going to have a little bit of talk on that a little bit, but the people who are afraid to talk about this, the people who don't want to have conversations in the Valley about this, to them I say, it's not that complicated. And it's not something that, and I've spoken to a lot of people in private on this who have messaged me about it because they see me posting in solidarity with justice for George Floyd, in solidarity with justice for all black communities who are being ravaged by police violence. So they hear terms like abolish the police, they hear terms like police reform, things like that. And I think a lot of people in the Valley, unfortunately, have reacted very negatively to something like that. But it could be that they have just not really examined the fact that we are spending hundreds of millions of dollars to treat people very violently, to destroy families, to destroy lives, money that we could be using in our community for something else. So when we say abolish the police, for those people who are listening, who may not be in agreement with that, when we say abolish the police, what we really mean is that the police force over the last couple of decades has really become a military force and has become a law enforcement through different organizations. Right now we have ICE and Border Patrol, we have Homeland Security, we have the police officers. We've got everybody now, so many different departments doing enforcement on the border, and much more powerful than they used to be. So even just the equipment they have, just the fact that the Border Patrol 100 miles within the border of the country doesn't have to respect your rights, your constitutional rights, in the same way that they would in other areas. We live under those conditions now. So it's very simple to say, look, maybe this has gone a little bit too far. Can we roll this back? Do we have to spend billions of dollars to militarize these people now? Another thing that we can talk about when we say abolish the police or reform police is, can we make cops more responsible for when they do bad things? And that's very simple. That's very, very simple, because right now, I'm going to give you a term. It's a 2-word term, and if you've never heard of it, I want you to Google this and I want you to read about it, because it's really going to inform you how simple, really, a lot of this topic is in terms of the structure of government. In terms of racism, that's very complicated. But when we're talking about the structure of government, the phrase is qualified immunity. Qualified immunity in this country. And to give it to you directly, qualified immunity is a law that went into effect in the 80s and basically makes police officers immune from any bad behavior that they partake in, unless there is some case in the past very specific to what is happening in the present case that, was concluded as guilty in the past. So if in the past a police officer was found guilty in the exact same situation that you're going through with this police officer today, then he might get convicted. But otherwise, he's got qualified immunity. So a little bit complex, you should read about it. But the ultimate effect is that today in our country, police officers can injure, they can kill, they can do things even out of maliciousness. The law actually has that word in it for qualified immunity. If the police officer is found to have done it maliciously, they are still protected, unless there was some legal precedent that would convict them. So again, it's just very simple. We have this police force that's now really a military inside the country that has qualified immunity to do whatever they want, to kill people, to injure people, to do things maliciously. And we are seeing that on social media. We are seeing so many videos of police officers beating and shooting people in crowds, peaceful protests. And the one, I think, major one in people's minds is a peaceful protest, completely peaceful protest of people in Lafayette Park across from the White House that was cleared out with smoke bomb, with the tear gas and rubber bullets, so the president could take a walk across the street to a church through Lafayette. And so this is what we're talking about. This is what we're talking about. I saw actually a horrific video earlier this week, and I'm not going to play it, but of an elderly man, and I know many of you probably saw it, an elderly man, maybe in his 60s, 70s, or 80s even, and the cops literally just shoved this man for no reason. I mean, he was walking around. He might have been asking for directions. He fell back, hit his head, immediately started bleeding. His life's in danger. He's dying. None of the cops did anything to help. Walked by. One guy eventually kind of circled around, said something on his radio, maybe getting help after seeing all this blood on the ground. And that's what they can do. That's what they can behave. So, in effect, that's what we've got walking around. And when we say abolish the police, it's not that complicated. Okay? We're just talking about, hey, you can't just kill anybody whenever you want to. There's going to be legal consequences for you. If you're a cop, you're walking around, you shove an old man into the sidewalk and he cracks his head open, you can't do that. It should not be legal, but it's legal today. So it's completely ridiculous. Qualified immunity, look that up. And another part of changing laws, another thing that I would recommend looking into is police violence across the country. There's a fantastic website called Mapping Police Violence that collects all of the black deaths that occur under the hands of police departments in precincts across the country. And again, go onto this website. What we see there is that communities with the same demographics, same level of violent crime, same, population density and size, you compare them and you have some communities where the police is killing dozens of black people a year, and then similar communities where there hasn't been a black murder in years. Right? And these communities that are being ravaged by these racist precincts, they're right there. But investigations are not opened. Right? Nobody's investigating. Justice Department, FBI, they're just there. And we're collecting that data and we're looking at it. And statistically alone, we see that, yes, this is happening. There are precincts where statistically alone, we know it's impossible to see that kind of data unless that police department is killing people on purpose to the tune of dozens of people a year, every year. And if you check out Mapping Police Violence, unfortunately, you will see that at least it's 1,000+ deaths a year of black people in these communities that we're talking about. So that's what we're talking about when we say this is not good. That's what the protesters are talking about here in the Valley and everywhere else when they're saying there's got to be a change, something's got to happen. Right? Is that we've reached that point in this country where that's the kind of law enforcement that we have in this country. And people are saying we don't want that anymore. It doesn't work for our communities anymore. We're being murdered by these people. We're not being protected by these people. So, in that case, you could say that if all of that is true, then we already live in a state of lawlessness, except the outlaws are wearing badges. And that is absolutely true. If everything I have said before this is true, if a person with a badge can murder without consequences, if they are equipped to do that on a military level capacity without consequences, then we can say that we already live in a lawless state. So there's no need to worry about coming chaos. It's already here. This can already happen to you. You don't have to be afraid of what's going to happen if the police aren't around. The police are already doing this. And I think we're going to do some episodes in the future of how this authority is being overused in our area in the following weeks, because there's actually quite a lot there. I don't want to shift the focus from Black Lives Matters for this episode, but there's plenty in our region that's going on, and we will have a segment in a little bit about some of that when we look at Eddie Lucio Jr.'s voting record. So let's take a look one more time at this video. I just want to play this one more time because I want you all to see when this protester handled this person.
Get the fuck out of here. Sorry. Sorry. Get the fuck.
And so you can see
That bullshit with some fucking nigger and a bad cop do not belong here.
shouting there.
This is not up there. This is here. Get the fuck home. You fucking idiots. Do this shit again.
There he touched somebody there. And they're trying to keep him calm and stand in front of him. Right there, he grabs a poster, folds it up, rips it up, and right there he grabs that young lady and shoves her around and takes her poster back. So that's what we're dealing with there. So we saw that contact, and then we definitely saw this, which is the most violent part. And we can hear from the audio that that powered chainsaw was on when he threatened people with it.
Don't let these pendejos right here. Don't let these fucking assholes lie to you. Don't let them lie to you.
So we don't know what the charges are yet, but we do expect for them to be something because we saw a lot going on there in this attack. Very dangerous man, and hopefully we'll see some of those charges coming out. We will be talking about a lot of the points that I just mentioned in this segment as the weeks go on. I'm not going to let the story die. We have to talk about law enforcement. We have to talk about what is happening in our region and across the entire country, which we are absolutely a part of. Our right to assemble anywhere is the same as our right to assemble here, and we have to, as citizens, as good citizens, protect those rights. Now, we want to talk next about Texas Senate District 27. Lines are open at 956-224-9082 to give your thoughts on anything on the show tonight, and also later to speak with Sara Stapleton Barrera when she comes on the line. Sara Stapleton Barrera, of course, is running to represent Texas Senate District 27. That's the area on the map right there. So it's most of the valley, and I know Edinburgh's not in there, but it's most of the valley. It includes Kingsville. Right under Corpus Christi it stops. And this is the Senate district that we're going to be voting on July the 14th. July the 14th is the day we choose the person who is going to represent us there. Now, and we'll mention this again during the show, but for those of you who are thinking, well, you know, I don't have time or I'm not registered to vote, you have 10 days. So you have 10 days to register to vote still at the Texas Secretary of State website. We'll put that up on a blog post as well, a link to that. You're going to get an application by mail, fill it out, send it back, and you're going to be able to vote on July the 14th for who's going to represent us for Texas Senate District 27. Now, this is, you know, it's the Texas Senate. They go up and they do all kinds of laws and around everything in our area for the next 4 years. And tonight, I wanted to talk a little bit about who the person who is the current representative, Eddie Lucio Jr. We're going to talk about his greatest hits, his voting record, so that we can familiarize ourselves with what has been going on since he's been in office since 1991. It's 29 years, going on 30 years now. And if he is elected again, we're talking about going to 35. So almost 4 decades if he is elected again. Now, to be fair, we're going to go down his voting record to see what he has done in this region. And, of course, this is all stuff that's already happened. So we don't need to speculate about how he would be in office. We know. And we're going to talk about Eddie Lucio Jr.'s greatest hits on his voting record tonight. And first up is his voting record on immigration. And seeing a lot of hellos on the Facebook Live. Hello to everybody out there in the Rio Grande Valley. So, Eddie Lucio's greatest hits on immigration from the past couple of decades that he's been in office. We just talked about the Immigrant Detention Center in Raymondville, and we touched upon some of the topics of why it's so relevant today. But you guys already know this facility. It's an immigrant detention facility in Raymondville. You've seen it on national news because it became notorious for filthy conditions, for maggot-infested food. It was all over the news, everywhere. And there's still stories like this coming out about immigration detention centers all over the country. Most recently, we saw one coming out of, I believe, California, where immigrants are actually being sprayed with chemical cleaners that are making them sick. And this is still happening now. But these detention centers, obviously, terrible detention centers. But here's what Eddie Lucio did as a senator. One of his greatest hits as a senator. He voted in favor of spending $800 million, first of all, to militarize the whole border in 2015. So there's almost $1 billion to militarize the border. So there's a lot of stuff in that bill. Military equipment, everything. Places, equipment, the whole deal. Jobs, everything. So $800 million. Now, like we said before, this is money that could have been spent on something else. So your kids who go to a school that needs more supplies, it's a great example of where this money could have gone. Communities that don't have internet, rural communities around the valley that do not have internet. Kids go to school, they come home, they don't have internet at home. It's $1 billion. What could we have built with $1 billion instead of a military presence on the border that now only serves to cage people, and we're just paying to have them cage, separate the families, cage the children, cage the people. Now they're spraying them with cleaner. We're paying for all this. That's money we don't get. And then why? Why are we paying $800 million? This man said, let's spend $800 million to do all this. I don't think that the kids that are in the detention centers were doing anything violent or criminal before they were there. And I think we can all agree on that. But to go back to the detention center in Raymondville, here is the sweetest plum, as they say, of this greatest hits of Eddie Lucio. Eddie Lucio in 2003 and 2014 actually, and as a senator, worked. He was paid as a consultant by a for-profit prison corporation to build the 2,000-bed immigration detention center in Raymondville, Texas. Now, for those of you who may not be super familiar with this process, this is a private company, right? They build jails and they manage jails and they make money from this. The government pays them to do that. That's how the private business works. But it's not easy to just build a new complex because it needs to be filled with people. You need the laws to change to say, okay, well, now these people go in there on this new law. Now we separate families, right? Now we detain, now we hold. And so these businesses need somebody to organize all of this change, all of this structural, political, policy change to bring about these contracts that they are then awarded. And this is how they make money. In this case, Eddie Lucio Jr. was in the middle of the whole song and dance, and he was paid. He was paid by this private company to help organize this government contract for the jail, and that is the Immigrant Detention Center in Raymondville. So one of the top hits of Eddie Lucio Jr.'s representation on Texas Senate District 27. Everything to do with what's going on in the country today, and we're gonna keep talking about this. We're gonna talk about it tonight, but we're gonna keep talking about this. And again, we have a vote coming up July the 14th. Protesting. That's a right. Voting. That's a right that we have. Democratic right. Democratic responsibility. So that's happening on July 14th. So for everybody who's organizing right now, all of you, voting is also a very important part of the democratic process. Let's move on to another greatest hit by Eddie Lucio Jr. Let's talk about something recent, COVID-19, his response to COVID-19. Now, apparently from what I researched, this is the guy who was responsible for working with Governor Abbott to bring down testing sites and so forth. To give you a little bit of background on this, and I'm sure you've heard this before, but this community that he represents, the Rio Grande Valley, is a community which people have described as high risk to something like COVID-19, and that is for several different reasons. Number one, many people here are not as insured as people in other areas. So, high-risk community, not as much health insurance as other places. Also, people here earn less money, and they have less resources to social distance by staying home. There's less jobs that can be done from home. And so, also, we have high rates of conditions like diabetes and heart disease. So we have all these three or more pillars of high risk to something like COVID-19 in this particular community. However, let's see. I think we're having a little bit of problem with the connection going in and out. Very sorry about that. I'm actually in one of these rural areas that needs better internet. So I have a cheap satellite internet that's available to people in rural areas. Some people, not everybody. Just so happens to be in a little section of the map where I can catch some signal from a tower near here. But definitely I'm not on broadband, so thank you for your patience with this connection sometimes. But on COVID-19, as I was saying, RGV, high-risk community. On March 4th, let's look at a timeline of this. March 4th, we saw the first cases in Texas. Eddie Lucio hadn't talked about it yet, hadn't brought it up yet. 9 days later, Donald Trump declares a national emergency. Still nothing. March 13th, right? 6 days later, on March the 19th, which is, at the end of the month now. So at the beginning of the month, we're seeing first cases in Texas. All the way almost to the end of the month, Lucio finally writes to Governor Abbott, at this point urging him to allocate resources for the Rio Grande Valley. So very late on getting testing down here, and this man is wise. So this is another of his greatest hits. And just to add to the whole thing, he did not urge for any kind of cancellations. The cancellations that occurred at South Powder Island, Stock Show, those things initially, if you all remember, came down from the county judges, those initial closings. So he did not take a look at that. It's very hands-off, and we needed him greatly to bring down those testing sites much earlier, to bring down those resources much earlier. And as you all saw, yesterday was the highest record-breaking day of daily COVID infections in the Rio Grande Valley ever. And by a large margin, I'm going to be watching the numbers that come out today. We had a report, it's on our website now, of that, where I spoke to Ronnie Garza, who maintains a website showing data from all 4 counties. So far, we have been climbing up slowly. It looks now that because of the closings, this is going to accelerate much faster. Could we have flattened the curve even more had Eddie Lucio acted sooner, maybe a month sooner? The science says absolutely. Science says yes. especially for a community as vulnerable as ours. And then we're going to see, and we're also going to keep tracking the COVID numbers in the Rio Grande Valley, taking a look at some of that. So that's the second greatest hit that we are talking about tonight, Eddie Lucio Jr.'s voting record. So we're going to have Sara Stapleton Barrera, who is running for Texas Senate District 27 at 9 o'clock. She's going to be videoing in, and lines are open, 956-224-9082 now and for that interview later as well. I want to talk about at least two more, and I've got a long list here. But we've got about 15 minutes left. I want to talk about two more greatest hits by Eddie Lucio Jr., the guy who represents us at the Capitol right now, on education. Okay? Education. So this is going to be about private schools, charter schools. And many of you may not be super familiar with this. Everybody who has kids in school probably is very familiar with this because it's been a while since, as a state and as a region, we were sold on the idea that we should take money from public schools, and put it into these private schools or partially privately owned schools, religious schools, taking all that public money from the public schools and concentrating it into these private schools. So Lucio voted twice for, let's talk about this, private school voucher scholarship in 2015-2017 legislative sessions that would divert state franchise tax dollars away from the state budget and use them to subsidize private and religious schools. So that's a fancy way of saying what I just said. Take money from public schools, put it into private and religious schools. He voted for this. In 2015, he said yes. In 2017, he said yes. He made that possible. When the school choice measure, okay, which is a legislation which provided tax credit for businesses that donate money to fund these private schools. Okay, so not just taking money from public schools, but in effect, taking tax money from everybody. Because now we're saying, okay, if you're a business, usually you pay taxes, and those taxes pay for everything in the state. Now, if you donate some money to these private schools, you don't have to pay those taxes anymore. Right? So that's double punch. Because the taxes get taken away from the public school system, and then we get taxes taken away just in general that businesses would usually pay. They don't have to pay them anymore. So he's diverting all this public money to these private schools. Now, we spent a lot of time debating these charter schools, debating these vouchers, debating whether this money should go into them. And it's been a while. This is not a new issue. But what is new is what is happening at some of these private schools. IDEA, for example, in the Rio Grande Valley. Just a few weeks ago, the CEO of IDEA, which receives a lot of public funds, this is your money that you pay, taxes, IDEA School. The CEO of IDEA School, basically, something came out in the press that this guy was spending millions of dollars on private jet flights, sports tickets, all kinds, ridiculous stuff that you don't need to run, a school district in Westico, a school district in McAllen, flying around on a private jet, getting, I think it was LA Lake, like a whole season of tickets for LA Lakers, millions of dollars, many different things. So, comes out in the news, otherwise we would not have known. But this guy resigned, right? He put in his resignation and left, which basically means you get fired. But he's the CEO of this big thing. So he resigns, basically fired. Now, it was reported just about a week ago that after the fact that he was found to be doing this, the organization was doing this with other expenses as well, and he's leaving, resigning, basically getting fired. He is walking away with $900,000. Now, this is not money for work that he's doing. He went home a long time ago. This guy went home. They sent him home. He doesn't work for IDEA anymore. He's not the CEO of IDEA anymore, but IDEA says, here's a check for $900,000. By the way, on your way out. Here's $1 million on your way out of partially public funds. And this is the result of another greatest hits by Eddie Lucio Jr. in Texas Senate District 27. So very interesting results. And you guys can take this voting record. You can look at it. Unfortunately, a lot of media in the region doesn't really talk about his record this way. And in fact, in my search, and somebody maybe from Rio Grande Guardian can call me and explain this to me. I have no idea. But in my research for this, what I saw on some of these, supposedly independent journalism websites is I think Rio Grande Guardian just prints letters that Eddie Lucio Jr. sends in. Right? And I just saw that. Like, it's not even, they didn't even write a story about what was going on or anything. They just printed the thing that he sent in. Which, to be fair, of course, many newspapers will print, a letter to the paper. Everybody does that. Politicians, the whole thing. In this case, if you go back through the archives, it's a little bit of a gray area. Some of the stuff that's being published there. And this stuff does get written about. But unfortunately, we do have that sort of treatment of Eddie Lucio Jr. in the media, in the local press, where I think the last one was for Memorial Day, right? So he wrote a letter for Memorial Day saying some words that to the people who are looking at his voting record may not sound as authentic as they would be had he actually done some better things for the community, right? But Rio Grande Guardian, again, just posting it up. And it may be that, to single them out is not necessarily what I want to do. There may be other publications that do that with Eddie Lucio Jr. and with a lot of other different politicians. I've seen that before. But the last greatest hit, and maybe we'll have room for one more, that I want to talk about, something from last year and years before, actually, is Senate Bill 6, which many people have heard as, quote, the bathroom bill. So basically, this bill prohibits transgender-friendly bathroom policies in public schools and universities and in government buildings. So everybody's heard about this. We heard about it when it was really big in the news, right? People wanted to have transgender-friendly bathrooms in these government offices. And Senate Bill 6 in Texas said, no, can't do that. Can't do it. And so this is really it's about a lot of things. But for a lot of people close to the Republican side, at least, for some people on the Democratic side, this was about a separation of church and state. So what that means basically is that the government, because of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, right, we cannot discriminate people based on their sexual orientation, on their gender, their race, religion. I mean, look at what's happening right now. This is very relevant to that. The state can't do that. No, really, nobody's supposed to be doing that, right? But this particular bill was just about government buildings. But that's really that was really the point, right? Is that in the government, we respect everybody, regardless of age, race, sexual orientation, gender, But Lucio said no, not for transgender people. And he gave a quote. He said, quote, I don't believe in separation of church and state. I don't believe in separation of church and state. Everything that I do, I look at it as an act of faith that I have for all people, which is really a confusing statement. To take his statement, everything that I do, I looked at as an act of faith, of moral obligation that I have for all people. To take that quote and superimpose it on the photos of these immigrants in this, what some people have called concentration camps. And we're going to start waking up to these realities in the valley. What some people have called concentration camps here. And you can look at some of these images and you can look at some of these stories. And it is not easy to deny that that term could be used. But this man took private money to organize this, use our money that we put in his hands to make this possible. And he says, everything that I do is an act of faith, of moral obligation that I have for all people. So it doesn't ring true. And if that doesn't ring true, then Senator Lucio voted against transgender rights for a totally different reason. I think it absolutely logical. What reason could that be? Of course, many people have said that it is straight up discrimination. And it looks like we might have a caller here. We got an incoming call. Hi, you're on Hotline Live.
Hey, yeah, so we are watching this right now, and we want to talk about the protest today and just like how great this video is. Is that cool?
Where are you calling from, sir?
McAllen.
Okay, calling from McAllen, and you wanted to give your opinion on the video from the first section of the show. I'm just going to ask you to turn down the sound on the live stream that you have in the background so that we're able to hear you more clearly.
Okay, so we can mute it. Is that cool?
Sure.
Hey, so I just wanted to say.
Okay, Conklin County, you want us to go to the video from the first section of the show. I'm going to ask you to turn down the sound on
yes, sir.
you have in the background, which we're able to hear you more clearly.
Looks like we're having a little bit of problem with audio on the caller's side. Go ahead, sir. Caller from McAllen, Texas.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that this venue, what you're doing right now, is so important for the Valley in general, that you are bringing all these issues out in a way that like so many people can actually absorb it and like really see it for what it is. And so
thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Like so on that level, you are doing such a fantastic job. It's fantastic. And
thank you.
Otherwise, like, yeah, so we were at the protest today in McAllen.
You were at the protest today.
It was yeah. It was and it was really cool. It was cool. Like everyone was cool. It was a very great expression of like what the Valley actually is bringing to the table in terms of like trying to express like. So there is protest about what's going on in the Valley, and then there is the expression of like what the Valley has to say about what's going on in terms of BLM, and I feel like the protest today in McAllen was a very good expression of that, and I just want to say thank you very much for what you're doing for your show.
Thank you so much.
And peace out. I love you.
Thank you very much for calling.
Pablo, is it? No.
And who is on the line now? I
Wait,
hear.
this isn't Pablo, is it?
This
No.
is Pablo. Yes. I think we got cut off there. Okay. So, caller from McAllen, Texas, doing kudos for the show, and present at the protest earlier today. So, we have talked about the protests. We've talked about Black Lives Matter in the Rio Grande Valley. We're going to keep showing our support, our solidarity here for justice, for black communities being ravaged by this violence. And in the coming weeks, we want to keep the conversation going about Black Lives Matter. We want to round out that conversation with what is happening here in our own region, the structure of law enforcement, the structure of policy with people like Eddie Lucio Jr., the racism and colorism attitudes that we have here in this region that also makes it very dangerous to even stand on a street corner and say that people have a right not to die at the hands of police. We're going to be talking about this over the next coming weeks. And obviously, we don't want to have that conversation die down. Now, next up, we're going to have Sara Stapleton Barrera on the show. She's the person who is running to represent Texas Senate District 27, which we're going to vote on July 14th for. She's going to be videoing on the show in just a second, and we're going to be talking about her platform, what she plans to do in the office, and how she plans to get it done. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Sara Stapleton Barrera to the show, candidate for Texas Senate District 27. Sara, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the first half of your show. Really important stuff, so thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Now, people have been getting to know you over the past couple of weeks. You've been on live streams, you've done town halls. I mean, you've gone all over the place to talk to the community. They're very familiar with your Democratic platform that you are running on. Now, I say Democratic, and just to tell people who don't know, Senator Lucio is a Democrat, but most of his votes fall along Republican party lines. So there's been a lot of votes where he votes with Republicans. So he is a Democrat. You're also a Democrat running against Eddie Lucio. We're going to get into your platform, but before we do that, I actually want to start right at the beginning of this campaign for you. Why did you decide? How did you get into running for this office? What was the beginning for you, and how did you make that decision?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was sort of a crazy ordeal. I'm an attorney, right? So I was in the middle of a a 6-month long jury trial, and it was hard. It was emotional, and I needed to take a little break and kind of do some soul searching and some reevaluating. Figure out if I'm doing enough to help my community, and where is our system. Oops. So I took a little time, and in this sort of soul searching, I kind of fell down a rabbit hole and fell upon Senator Lucio. And when I started looking at his voting record, I realized this is where our system is broken. This is the break in the chain. This is why we are not progressing here in South Texas. And once I realized where he stood on a lot of his voting record, I had to make a decision. And the choice was either, hey, now that I know, I just sit back and let it be what it is, or I stand up and I fight, and I don't take no for an answer. So here we are. We've gotten pretty far, and I'm excited to be where I am.
Right. And I think that that's something that I really connect with, because for me, and I'll admit this on the show, I was involved in organizing and helping the community back when I was in college. And I graduated in 2015 or something like that. And so since then, I have put it down. And I got more into other industries. I started working and got more into the tech industry and business and things like that. And I have revisited from time to time. So, for example, I have volunteered for some campaigns. But to go back to your point, this is all coming together for me as well right now. So everything you're saying about all of this coming together for you, making sense in terms of what's happening in the country with BLM, what is going on with law enforcement in the country, what's going on with everything that we're doing here, and all of this voting record that he's got, the direction of the region basically that we're going in, everything is sort of connecting for me. And you're saying that you had a similar experience, and you were working as an attorney, working on I guess a long case, and that's what got you to make the decision to run for office. Now, you haven't held office before. Obviously, when you made this decision to run for office, you had to put your platform together. Was that something you spent a lot of time on, or did you already know from your experience working in law, this is what we need to do in the region? What was that process like?
Yeah, so I certainly had a sense of, where my moral compass sort of guided me. But I put a lot of work into it and did a lot of research, and really made informed decisions, and, and followed smart plans. And it was definitely not just, thrown together by the seat of my pants. I mean, it's something that if you're going to run for office and you are going to put your ideas out on the table, clearly you have to be prepared, and you have to show people, look, I know what I'm doing, and this is how we accomplish it, and this is a result that these steps will result in. So, yes, it's taken a lot of time and practice, and it's still to this day evolves and grows and just gets better and better by the day.
Fantastic. And before we get into specific policies on your platform, I actually just want to hear, what is your vision for our region? I mean, what's the future that you see for us that you would like to bring to fruition over the next 4 years if you do win?
Sure. Yeah. So, look, the number one thing that we deserve down here is just equality and equity. We deserve to be brought up to the same level as the rest of the state, as opposed to being, the last ones to get the resources, or the last ones to advance in education, or the last ones to advance in healthcare. We, just because we're a border town in South Texas, does not mean that we are not deserving. I grew up here. This is my home. And about 8 years ago, I was a single mom struggling, trying to make the day-to-day, just, Pampers and working and making sure I could afford daycare. And at that point, I realized, look, our area down here is not built for people that are struggling to do that day-to-day. And the inequality just expanded on so many different levels. So that's when I really started noticing, hey, this system is built not to help us, but really to tear us down and to hold us into place. And, I think that's why I went into law and where I am now. And as the years go by and the older I get, the more I see. And we deserve better. And so that's why I'm here.
I see. And powerful words in terms of the system is built to tear us down. The system is built to hold us down. We know as we look into some of the economic data in our region, we have some of the poorest areas in the country at the same time that we have some of the fastest growing metros in the country. So what does that tell you? Is that there's a lot of inequalities. There's a lot of people making a lot of money and a lot of people stuck in poverty. Now, in an area that is as rich as ours with industry and resources, with retail and trade and all this kind of stuff, that really should not be happening. So I can absolutely see where a vision like that would come from. And so to get more specific on that, what are some of the more specific policy changes or programs that you are going to be championing, that you're going to be pushing forward in the office if you were to win?
Sure. So we need overhauls all across the board, but I'll focus specifically on education. We have leaders and legislators that say, well, children are our number one priority and, the children are our future. And okay, well, let's put our money where our mouth is, right? I mean,
right.
Any politician that you talk to will claim, well, we just spent $6.5 billion on our children's education. Great. I mean, that's a start, but Texas has like a $250 billion spending budget. We've got a lot more money to deal with. They're not our number one priority. We're just kind of throwing scraps and hoping that the teachers can get by, hoping that the students can get by without the resources that they need. You hear the teachers saying, well, they've promised us this extra $5,000. They promised it, but they're not seeing it. Because there's loopholes in that bill that are, the bill is written the way that it is to sound really good, but not actually deliver what the people are expecting it to deliver. So that's the first thing. We pay our teachers. We make sure our students have the resources. We make sure the classes aren't overcrowded. We do an overhaul. We need to make sure that the students are actually learning subjects based off peer reviewed articles and scientific information, as opposed to some of this sort of old school sort of approach. We need to modernize. Here we are. We're ready to be in step with the rest of the state, and let's do it.
Right, and everything you're saying, one of the things in my mind really quick is that here in this area, and I could be wrong about this, it seems like higher education is very, very sort of on the edge of, modernization. We just have this new medical college at UTRGV and all this stuff, but K through 12, it seems like there are some areas that are extremely neglected. So there's a little bit of disconnect there. So I think that yes, our community could greatly benefit from sort of funding well that entire pipeline. What if our K through 12 schools across the valley were as modernized and well funded as like the UT system branch down here that we have across the valley now? I mean, that would be such an incredible benefit for our area. I mean, that would change lives. The generational social mobility effects of that would be absolutely immense. But my question to you now, and this is actually something that I didn't look up, and I don't know if you have this information on hand, but in terms of that, right, and we've talked about how a lot of this money is being diverted to private school. We're talking about how money is being diverted to these immigration centers. Realistically, how much more funding could we get for public schools down? Like, how much money is there? Could we say, we could double the funds? Could we triple the funds? What are we talking about just tactically?
I think the sky's the limit. Look, it's really a matter of allocation. I mean, Texas, we need somebody in our state legislature can actually tell us where our money is going. You don't know, and I don't know because we're not part of that tight knit circle, right? But
Got
if we
it.
can get somebody in there that can break it down and say, look, 10% of the funding is going to this, 5% of the funding is going to this, then we can actually visibly, tangibly have something in front of us where we can make decisions and say, hey, look, this 5% allocated to whatever this is not really helping the people. This can go to education, or this can go to healthcare. There's zero transparency. So that's what's needed is transparency, so we know where our tax dollars are going and what our leaders are doing with it. So yeah, I mean, we're left in the dark. So I don't know.
So much more equitable funding for education. What are some other areas that we can improve in terms of having more equality and more fair equity for everybody in the region?
Yeah, so just last week, I went and visited at one of our colonias, and you know, when you drive into a colonia, you feel as if, I mean, I live in the middle of Brownsville, right? But when you drive into a colonia, you feel like you are on a different planet. There's no street lights. There's dogs running all over the neighborhood. There's mattresses packed on the side of the road. And I went and I talked to these families, and these families, I mean, you talked about not having, having bad internet. These families, their children can't do their schoolwork with this distance learning because they can't access the internet. They have to drive or get a ride or figure out how to get out of their neighborhood because they don't have cars to a place where they can access internet. They don't have health care. In this particular colonia, they would, one of the women that I spoke with said, well, once a month, a big mobile van will come in here and will check us and do sort of like routine checkups. But that's the extent of their health care. In the past 3 months, she had told me that 3 people had died in that colonia from stuff
Oh
that
my
probably
God.
could have been avoided because they just don't have the access. I mean, this is in the United States. This is right here in our neighborhoods. It's unfathomable that we have people living in those conditions. It's inexcusable, and I'm ashamed that this is where we are.
So we are talking about more equality, more fair equity for all citizens of the Rio Grande Valley with Sara Stapleton Barrera tonight. The call-in number is 956-224-9082. Sara just talked about a second strategy of sort of getting this done, having more equality, and that is what you're saying, basically creating infrastructure in these rural areas. And it is true, there's a great disparity between the rural areas of the Rio Grande Valley and what you would call commercial centers, more business-oriented centers, things like that. And just actually last week on the show, I got to talk about the CARES Act, federal funds, and the way that those funds were distributed in Hidalgo County. Initially, there was a huge controversy because the judge of the county, Cortez, he took it upon himself to change the per capita award that the state had set, and that Abbott and the people on the committees, on the finance committees, had gone out of their way to say, please give this to people equally. And Cortez went out of his way to give more money to the larger cities and keep less money distributed per capita to the rural areas. And all of his reasons for doing that didn't make any sense. I searched around, I couldn't make sense of it. Taking that example, why do you think in that particular example that the judge did that with those federal funds, and what does that represent in terms of the culture of funding and politics for these rural areas means in the valley?
Look, it's all about the money to these guys. I mean, it's clear as day. And, when you've got a group of leaders and legislators that are thick as thieves, they're going to protect their own. And they're going to protect the people that help them stay in office. They're going to protect the people that give them money. I mean, it's so upside down. I mean, the natural reaction should be, oh, well, these people are really, really suffering. This is where we should allocate our funds. right? I mean, that's what I think
Absolutely.
normal people would sort of gravitate towards. But it's not that way, unfortunately, and it's just a matter of poor leadership.
It didn't turn out that way. The judge's actions on these particular funds showed how that gets put together, driving through these rural areas, these colonias, and then through these other cities that in this case were giving more awards, shows us just visually, viscerally, the difference between those areas that are not given support, that are not given funding. And Sara Stapleton Barrera is saying this is one of the things that she wants to work on top of education, is building infrastructure for these communities that need it so badly. So let's go further on your platform that you're running on. What are some of the other issues that you've been talking to people for the past couple of weeks as you move forward on your campaign?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of talk of education, a lot of talk of the infrastructure. One of the issues where Senator Lucio, and you touched upon it with SB 6, but where he's really, really failed us is on his discriminatory views regarding the LGBTQ community. I mean, SB 6 is just sort of like the iceberg. I mean, there was also SB 17, which gave employers a license to discriminate. And as an attorney, when I heard that, it was shocking to me. And I have friends that are, school counselors and that sort of stuff, and we're just appalled. The fact that somebody could come into my office, and if I didn't like the way that they looked, or if I thought that they were part of the LGBTQ community, I could turn them away. It is mind-blowing that we're in 2020, and that's where we are. And what else has he done? He's also, in 2015, he joined his Republican colleagues in the Senate to pass a resolution reaffirming the state's opposition to same-sex marriage. I mean, it's like he's, instead of progressing, he's trying to take us back 30 years. I just don't understand it. I just don't understand it.
Absolutely. I mean, I know that on the transgender bill SB 6, and I just commented, he tends to vote with the Republican side. The Republicans voted that. They wanted that. The Democratic Party at the time, nobody else in the Senate wanted that of the Democrats. His own son spoke out against it. And still, he put through this discriminatory bill. And I actually want to share with people on the show and share with you on these LGBTQ and transgender issues. I was actually having a conversation with a conservative gentleman from the Rio Grande Valley who owns a business. And I'm not going to say who he is, but we were talking about this exact thing. And I said, look, you have employees in your office. These employees have families. I know that you're conservative. Would you have, the brother of your employee come into your business who happens to be gay? Would you kick them out? And I said the specific person, because, and it was an example. I don't know their sexual orientation, but it was an example. I said, what if X person came in and he said he was gay? Would you kick him out? That's somebody in your like business network or whatever. And that made him think twice about it. I think if people are able to examine these issues on a much more personal level, they always find that what you're saying is correct. It's mind-blowing that people would behave this way, and absolutely mind-blowing that Eddie Lucio Jr. would enact it into law against the desire of even his own family. So very confusing. But again, we did share that quote earlier today, earlier on the show, about how he does not believe in the separation of church and state, and he believes some things about faith and morality that maybe some people might find pretty extreme. You mentioned Senate bill. You said it was 16?
I mentioned SB 17.
SB 17. Now, that's something I didn't provide any detail about on the show. What specifically was SB 17?
Right. So that was the license to discriminate.
License to discriminate. Okay.
Yeah.
And SB 6 was the bathroom bill. A lot of discriminatory legislation policies coming down for Senate District 27. And obviously, from what you're sharing, you would not support bills like this. We have reviewed a lot of bad stuff that has already been put together for the Valley. One of my questions is, how do we undo that? I mean, obviously, you're going to go into office. You know, these bills have already been voted on. Some of, a lot of them went through, some of them didn't. But, we have the immigration detention center in Raymondville. We've the whole issue with abortion. I mean, we have all of that going on. I guess just as even just a general political question, to be honest with you, is like, how do we undo that? You go into office, what happens to sort of roll that back?
You fight. I mean, you fight to amend the bill. You fight to undo the damage that has been done. I mean, nothing that has been done means that it's going to be that way forever. So it's just a matter of getting somebody in that's brave enough who will stand up and say, "Hey, this is total BS. We've got to. This needs to be undone."
So bill amendments.
And it can be done. Right.
Bill amendment, and this is basic stuff for you. I mean, obviously, there's probably people watching on the show who already know this. I'll admit my ignorance. I do know a lot of what's covered, but in terms of the political process, you would go into office, and you yourself would have to sort of bring these amendments to the table.
Yeah.
To
so
a lot of these
what
bills.
a legislator does is, right. Yeah. A legislator, in theory, sits and writes legislation. And I have a really good plan on how to actually write legislation. So for so long, what Senator Lucio has done is he doesn't write his own legislation. He has lobbyists that give him money that write the legislation for him. Or he's got these consultants that, you talked about being the consultant for the detention center, consultants who come in and write this legislation for him. And then he can call himself an author or co-author of a bill and then present this bill to the rest of the Senate. That's not the way I've intended on doing things. The way that I think that a bill and legislation needs to be written is with the people. And I'll give this example because it rang true to me. I mean, not too long ago, I met with a group of fishermen. I don't know anything about fishing. I don't know what their issues are, and when I spoke to them, they were able to describe to me the issues that they had as fishermen, regarding certain regulations and, certain things having to do with the waters. And those are the people that should be sitting with me at a table, pencil in hand, writing legislation that affects the fishermen. It's a collaborative effort. It's never been done that way down here, but that's what we need, and that's how it needs to be done. We need our state senator to sit in groups with the people who help craft legislation.
Got it. So this is a revelation to me, is the way that this legislation gets written. We can absolutely see what you're saying in terms of the way that Eddie Lucio is writing the legislation. It's more of a business almost, the way he hires out the legislation, the way that the lobbyists are the ones that are making decisions about what goes in there. We can see it just from the fruit of his labor, the results of the stuff that he's put together. You're saying shouldn't be. What should happen is that you are planning to come down and work closely with the community, have them be involved in writing the legislation, putting together the legislation that's ultimately going to affect them. That's not a radical idea. It's not a revolutionary idea. Maybe in this day and age, we're so used to not having that it sounds radical, but it's actually, it's actually very straightforward. So
it's very simple. Yeah. It's, the thing is that when you have, I think it should be illegal, right? When a senator is passed a $100,000 check and says, and they, and the lobbyists say, okay, well, you are our consultant, but this is the way that we need things to be done. I mean, it's legal bribery. So there certainly needs to be some reform. It shouldn't be legal. No politician or public servant really should be making millions and millions of dollars off of a public servant position. A state senator, do you know what their yearly pay is? It's $7,000. It's $7,000. That's it. I mean, this is not a get rich sort of a scheme. It's a public servant position, and Senator Lucio has forgotten that 30 years ago.
My goodness. Absolutely. There's a lot of money involved in politics, and what Sarah is saying is true because I know that I was reading about that on a national level in Congress, is that a lot of our laws get written by private interests, by companies, and they're submitted just like that to a vote in the Congress, and it should be the people's interest, not the business interest. And I guess. Thank you for bringing that up. I really hadn't, I guess, seen it through that. I've seen this situation, District 27, through that reality, but that is the reality that's happening. I guess that's one of the reasons why we see a lot of the ways that Eddie Lucio Jr. does vote on his record. To going back to education, before you were a lawyer, you were also a teacher, correct?
I was, yes.
How long were you a teacher here? And you were a teacher here in the Rio Grande Valley, or?
I was a teacher here in Brownsville. It was a very short-lived career. I got into it, and I realized that it was the hardest job I have ever had. And I've had a lot of jobs. And it was, I would go home probably on a weekly basis crying because it was, you're overworked, you're underpaid, you aren't getting the resources that you need, the tools that you need. My mom's a teacher, now she's a principal. My sister's a teacher. It kind of felt like the thing for me to do. But it was hard, and you gotta love it. And our teachers down here are so much more worthy than they're given credit for because, it's a hard job.
Absolutely. And, I laugh a little bit just because I've heard that story so many times, but the truth is that it is an unfortunate situation that teachers, and I think in many areas of the country, are super underpaid, and the job that they have to do is really beyond their resources. And of course, this goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation in terms of needing more funding for that. How long were you a teacher in Brownsville?
1 year. So I graduated from undergrad, came home, taught for a year. And, after that year, I went to law school because I realized that, hey, I don't have longevity in this field because it's just, I didn't want to be taken advantage of. And that's what's happening.
Right. So I think that probably that experience was one of the things, or maybe even one of the reasons why a lot of your platform has to do with education now as a result of that. What are some other issues that are included in your platform that you've been sharing with people?
Yeah, just because it's on the top of my mind because you were talking about it is this issue with Lucio and the detention center. So, I've been an attorney for 10 years and I've spent almost every day for the past 10 years in and out of those detention centers and in and out of those prisons. And, there's got to be major reform when it comes to the court systems. It's clear as day, with George Floyd and, all the issues that we're facing today, that the criminal justice system is not colorblind. The criminal justice system is completely broken. And major reform needs to happen, but we certainly do not need a legislator that sees a dollar sign with every inmate that walks by, or a dollar sign on any immigrant that passes their path. So certainly criminal justice reform.
There's a lot, like we said, going on right now, and in my mind, and this could be incorrect, but in my mind where I am right now, I have sort of, not a total division, but some separation into categories of the issues now. Partially issues of colorism and race, which are cultural, psychological, and social. And then on the other one, structural issues of policy, economics, government, infrastructure, like the one we're talking about in these communities. Now, obviously, both are very connected in reality. Do you think that someone who represents the Senate District 27, Texas Senate District 27, obviously we're talking about all the policy side. We're talking about one category. I want to, I guess, ask you, what about the other sort of half of that? The cultural challenges of colorism, the cultural challenges of the classism and the racism and colorism, again, that exists in our community. Do you think that someone in your office has at least some responsibility to address that somehow? And have you thought about how, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what a great question. You know, I grew up here, right? And I even remember as a little kid, you had this sort of sentiment, you know, with the fairer skinned you were, the better off you may be. And the darker skinned you were, the more likely you were to be a criminal or whatever it may be. And it was the way that people would address it. I mean, even the little old ladies was very endearing, you know, ay, el güero, or the colored eyes. You know,
we've heard our own families.
Yes.
In our community.
Unfortunately, what that did is it really it created this culture of, you know, this being good and this being bad. So it is certainly an issue that we deal with down here in South Texas. Now, we don't have an African American community as big as, you know, in other parts of the state. But we definitely do see that colorism. And I feel like now, more than ever, because of George Floyd, we're talking about it. This is the first time in a long time here in South Texas that people are talking about it. And people are marching. And people are opening their eyes. And people are researching what privilege means and what that looks like. And
right.
Yeah, it's definitely a huge, probably the number one problem in our system is Lady Justice is indeed not blind like she claims to be.
What kind of leaders do you think that it falls on to make a difference in that cultural side of the roots of these structures? What kind of leaders in our community can we look to, I guess, make some change there culturally for us?
I don't think you can call yourself a leader unless you are actively trying to make a difference regarding this issue. I think anything beyond that is not a leader. You know, if you're in a position of power or in a leadership position, you have a responsibility to make those aware, and you have a responsibility to use your platform and to try to make a difference.
Right.
Otherwise, you're no leader that I would like to follow.
Yeah. You know, and I asked that question because I've asked myself that question over the past couple of days. And, you know, leading up to this interview, obviously, any representative of a Senate district down here is a type of leader that deals with a lot of different issues. But obviously, it's going to take a lot of different kinds of leaders to pull us along into a new direction, and I even think about our religious institutions here. You know, the diocese, the Catholic diocese, the Christian Church. These are organizations that a lot of people in the Rio Grande Valley are very, very invested in. Right, it's part of their community. You know, what part can they play? Obviously, I think in their messages as well. And I'm not personally a religious person, but I do recognize that these are important institutions here in the Valley. As one example of a different type of leader that should be helping us along to make these cultural changes. And not just in colorism and racism, but in a lot of other ways that we limit ourselves under a hegemony of ignorance is the term that I used. I think it was either the last show or on a social media post or something like that. But, you know, I think it clicked for me even when I said it, was it's a hegemony of ignorance that we have here in the Rio Grande Valley that people who don't want to talk about these issues are protecting. People who don't want to change these horrible things like the Immigration Center are protecting. So, I mean, all this leads to my following question is, what do you think is really the biggest challenge of this election? Because, you know, Eddie Lucio has been in office for 30 years, and people keep voting him in despite all these votes for a lot of different reasons. What keeps him entrenched in your mind? And then why do you think that would change in this election on July 14th? What are the reasons in your mind, or the ways that this could actually change?
So we've already made history, right? Never in his 30 years has he had an opponent who has forced him into a runoff.
That's true.
I mean, he's never really had a formidable opponent all these years. So he's this position he has not had to fight for. It's just basically kind of been cyclical and handed to him every 4 years. And
Right.
why? Because people are afraid. And when I said, "Hey guys, I'm going to run," people are like, "You're crazy." The Lucios are vindictive. The Lucios will tear you down. The Lucios have $1 bajillion and you don't. I mean, you name it. And I heard it. And that's why he's been in office for so long, because he's instilled fear in a lot of people, and people are afraid of, their businesses being ruined, or their political futures being ruined, or their livelihood being ruined.
Let's talk about that runoff just real quick, because I haven't mentioned it at all on my show. July 14th is a runoff election. I know not every viewer that's viewing tonight understands exactly what that is. We had a vote for this Senate district already. And what happened was that Eddie Lucio was not able to get enough of the majority of those votes to seal the deal, in other words, right? So it was too close, and you trailed him so closely that now we have to vote again, and that's what's happening on July 14th. And you're saying this is the first time that this has ever happened. Eddie Lucio Jr. not quite unseated, but definitely a run for his money, because he was not able to accomplish it in the last vote. And now he has. So that is what a runoff means. That's what's happening on July 14th, is we're sort of breaking that tie. And that's the situation. So I think that's a very good answer. It's very encouraging, actually. We're very close, and something has happened here that has never happened before. Sara Stapleton Barrera is much closer by a huge margin in terms of the context of the situation than anybody else has been. I'm seeing a question here from one of our Facebook Live watchers. Orlando Vargas says, Mrs. Barrera, are you worried about voter turnout at the polls due to the pandemic? And what is your stance on voter mail-in ballots due to the pandemic?
Yeah, so it's sort of like uncharted territory. Nobody really knows what to expect and what voter turnout is going to look like. So we're having to be very strategic, and make sure that we really excite our voters in my base to come out that day. So there's a lot of like one-on-one, hey, remember, hey, bring your family, let's do this.
Right.
Regarding the mail-ins, look, my position is that I don't want anybody catching COVID. I don't want anybody getting sick and dying over going to the voting polls, and I think that everybody should have been afforded the chance to vote by mail. I think that under the Constitution, we should have been provided it. I think that under the election rules, we should have been provided it. But unfortunately, the GOP doesn't quite see it the same way. So here we are. But I'm not afraid. I am really positive, that my supporters and everyone that is so ready for a change will come out and we'll get this thing done.
Absolutely. And I think that there's, I wanted to do two things on this interview, and we've hit upon both. One of them is, the big issues that affect everybody: school funding, mail-in voting. We talked about rural infrastructure. We hit a little bit upon transgender issues, LGBTQ issues, immigrant issues. I think it's really important that, yes, we do focus on those big issues of funding everybody and infrastructure, but I think that it's super important to pay just as much attention to these groups that are minorities, I guess, in a way, and maybe marginalized communities here. in our region. What are we going to do for them? And we've hit upon some of those points. So in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, Sara, are you willing to make deep changes, defunding, changing the laws maybe around policing as much as you can in our region? Are you willing to actually do something to take power, take money, take funding away from law enforcement and law enforcement organizations here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the hot issue right now. Look, as an attorney who's done criminal defense, this is an issue that really, hits me at the core, because I've seen how the policing has created problems. I mean, I've had clients myself that were beaten to a pulp, and we had to figure out, how to try to make right out of a wrong, right? But look, this is going to take more than reform. This is not like an issue where we can just, make a couple policy changes. This is much bigger than that. I mean, this is a complete overhaul that needs to be done. We need a new paradigm on policing in the United States. The system as is needs to be completely dismantled and reconstructed, not just changing a policy here and there. Like I said, we're still working with a model of policing in this country that was really born out of slavery in this country, that was born out of white supremacy in this country. So what needs to happen, right? Besides a complete overhaul, specifically, we've got to change this term use of force, the standard, because clearly the standard is not working. People are dying. We need mandatory independent investigations of police using force cases that result in death or injury. We abolish qualified immunity for officers, and we increase oversight of funding to state and local police departments. I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. But yeah, I mean, what a loaded question. We need a complete overhaul.
Does that include organizations like ICE and Border Patrol for you in your mind?
Absolutely.
Especially in our community and all across the border in this country as well. We've hit upon a lot of different points for your platform, Sara. Thank you very much for being on the show tonight. I just want to mention one more time that the vote is happening on July the 14th. You still have 10 days to register to vote. I am going to be publishing and linking out on social media all the information you need to register to vote and any information you might need to actually vote on that day for the runoff. I think it's a very important vote, and anybody who's having conversations about all of these issues, which are all coming together in our minds now for us, needs to get out there, needs to make a decision about what kind of leadership they want for the Rio Grande Valley. They need to make a decision about whether or not they're serious in this particular case of voting to put someone in office who can really enact some of these changes. Like we mentioned before, it's obviously going to take a lot of different kinds of leadership, a lot of different kinds of social structural changes as we move forward. But July 14th is the day that we want to get this done, make this decision for our Rio Grande Valley community. Sara Stapleton, thank you so much for being on the show tonight.
Thank you for having me. There's no place I would rather be on my front porch with you guys here tonight. So I appreciate you.
Fantastic. Best of luck to you in the election, and we'll be waiting for those results. Rio Grande Valley, have a good night. Thanks for joining us on Hotline Live.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.